In the winter of 218 BCE, a Roman consul named Sempronius Longus was camped on the south bank of the Trebia River in northern Italy, staring across the water at Hannibal's army. Sempronius had a problem. His colleague Scipio had already been defeated at the Ticinus River and was recovering from wounds. The two consular armies had been combined under his joint command, and Hannibal, camped on the opposite bank, kept sending his Numidian cavalry to raid Roman positions and taunt the Roman soldiers into fighting. Sempronius wanted to attack. His colleague Scipio advised waiting. Let the men rest. Let winter weaken Hannibal's army. Fight in spring when conditions favored Rome. Hannibal was counting on Sempronius, ignoring that advice. What followed at the Trebia River was the first demonstration of something that would define Hannibal's entire Italian campaign: his ability to read his opponents perfectly and construct situations where their own instincts would destroy them. This is Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae. 3 perfect battles, the Battle of the Trebia. In December of 218 BCE began before dawn, on one of the coldest mornings of the year. Hannibal had prepared carefully. He had fed his soldiers a hot breakfast and rubbed them down with oil to protect against the cold. He had hidden a force of 2,000 elite infantry and cavalry under his brother Mago in a concealed position behind the Roman lines. Then he sent his Numidian cavalry across the river to harass the Roman camp. Sempronius reacted exactly as Hannibal predicted. He ordered his army out immediately, without breakfast, without proper preparation, in the bitter cold of a December morning. 40,000 Roman soldiers waded across the freezing Trebia River, chest deep in some places, and formed up on the far bank, cold, wet, and hungry, to face an enemy that had been warm and fed all morning. The battle that followed was a massacre. The Roman center held for a while. Roman legionaries were tough and disciplined, even in miserable conditions, but Hannibal's cavalry swept the Roman horsemen from the flanks, and Mago's hidden force emerged from concealment and hit the Roman rear. The Roman army was surrounded on 3 sides. About 10,000 Romans in the center fought their way through Hannibal's line and escaped Arno. A testament to the quality of Roman soldiers even in disaster. The rest were killed or captured. The river ran red. The Romans lost somewhere between 20 and 30,000 men. Rome had been defeated twice, 2 consular armies destroyed, and it was only December. The Senate replaced the field commanders and appointed new consuls for the following year. One of them was Gaius Flaminius, an experienced and popular commander, but, as events would show, a man whose aggression could be predicted and exploited. Hannibal spent the winter in the Po Valley, resting his army and recruiting more Gallic allies. When spring came, he moved south into Etruria, central Italy, through the Arno Marshes, a route that was faster but brutally difficult. Soldiers marched for days through waist-deep water. Pack animals died. Hannibal himself lost sight in one eye from an infection contracted in the swamps. He would remain blind in that eye for the rest of his life. He emerged south of the Apennines and began ravaging the countryside, burning, looting, and deliberately provoking Flaminius into following him. Flaminius followed. What happened at Lake Trasimene in June of 217 BCE is still considered one of the greatest ambushes in military history. The northern shore of Lake Trasimene is flanked by hills that come right down to the water's edge, leaving a narrow defile, a corridor barely wide enough for an army to march through. The road ran along this corridor for several miles before opening into a wider valley. Hannibal positioned his army in the hills above this corridor, completely hidden in the early morning fog that rose from the lake. He placed his strongest infantry at the far end of the defile to block the Roman advance, his cavalry across the entrance behind the Romans to cut off retreat, and his main force hidden in the hills on both sides of the road. Flaminius led his army of roughly 25,000 men into the defile in the early morning fog. unable to see more than a few yards in any direction. The army stretched out along the narrow road for miles. Then Hannibal gave the signal. Every Roman soldier on that road was suddenly attacked simultaneously from above by Hannibal's forces on the hillsides. There was no time to form battle lines, no room to maneuver, no way to see the enemy through the fog. Roman soldiers who had been marching peacefully through the mist were suddenly fighting and bounding in every direction at once. The battle lasted 3 hours. It was barely a battle. It was a killing ground. 15,000 Romans died, including Flaminius himself, cut down in the melee. 10,000 more were captured. The Romans had walked into a trap so perfectly constructed that they never had a chance to fight back properly. In Rome, the praetor who had to announce the defeat to the waiting citizens reportedly said simply, "We have been defeated in a great battle." After Trasimene, Rome appointed a dictator, the emergency office that gave one man supreme authority in a crisis. The man they chose was Quintus Fabius Maximus, and his strategy was as sensible as it was frustrating. Avoid pitched, mounted battle with Hannibal entirely. Shadow his army, cut off foragers, harass stragglers. Let time and supply problems wear him down. It was the right strategy. It was also deeply unpopular with Romans who wanted decisive action and were watching Hannibal march through Italy, burning everything in sight. The Romans nicknamed Fabius the Delayer, meant as an insult. History has vindicated him. But in 216 BCE, Roman political pressure produced exactly the kind of aggressive response Hannibal was waiting for. 2 consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, were given command of the largest army Rome had ever put in the field: 86,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry. The plan was simple: find Hannibal, bring him to battle, and destroy him with overwhelming numbers. Hannibal had about 50,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry. He was outnumbered roughly 2 to 1 in infantry. He chose his battlefield carefully. The plain near the village of Cannae in southern Italy was flat, open ground that favored cavalry, and Hannibal's cavalry was far superior to Rome's. More importantly, it was the kind of terrain where a large army would naturally try to use its numerical advantage by pushing forward in the center. Hannibal built a formation specifically designed to exploit that instinct. He placed his weakest troops, his Gallic and Spanish infantry, in the center of his line, deliberately bowed outward toward the Romans. His stronger African infantry he placed on the flanks, held back in reserve. His superior cavalry he positioned on both wings. When the battle began on August 2nd, 216 BCE, the Roman army advanced and drove into Hannibal's center as expected. The Gauls and Spaniards fell back, the bulge in Hannibal's line reversing itself. The Romans were now pushing into what was becoming a concave pocket. They compressed tighter and tighter, pushing harder, sensing breakthrough. Then the African infantry on both flanks rotated inward. Hannibal's cavalry, having routed the Roman horsemen on both wings, swept around behind the Roman army. The Romans were surrounded on all sides. 86,000 men packed into a space so tight they could barely raise their weapons. Hannibal's soldiers killed them from every direction. By the end of the day, somewhere between 50,000 and 70,000 Romans were dead. 2 consuls, 80 senators, and an enormous proportion of Rome's military leadership lay on the field. It was the largest single-day loss of life in Roman history, a record that stood for over 2,000 years. The double envelopment Hannibal executed at Cannae, drawing the enemy forward into a trap that closed from both sides simultaneously, became the template for military encirclement that generals have studied ever since. The German Schlieffen Plan in the First World War was an attempt to replicate Cannae on a continental scale. Military academies around the world still teach it. After Cannae, the ancient world expected Rome to surrender. Hannibal sent a Carthaginian nobleman to Rome to negotiate terms. The Senate refused to receive him. They refused and to ransom the prisoners taken at Cannae. They refused to recall armies from other theaters. They raised new legions, put 16-year-olds in armor, and kept fighting. Rome's refusal to accept defeat after Cannae is one of the most remarkable moments in military history. 3 catastrophic defeats in less than 2 years, the loss of perhaps 150,000 soldiers, and Rome simply would not stop. Hannibal had won every battle. He was about to discover that winning battles was not the same as winning the war. Next time in the Hannibal series, why Hannibal never marched on Rome itself? The decision that may have cost him everything, and the 15-year strategic deadlock that followed Cannae. Until then, this has been Drawn from History. Thanks for watching.